What's going on, guys? Welcome to another episode of Bro History. It's Henry Zamota and Danny Abdeljabbar. What's up, man? How are you feeling?
I'm feeling so good. We're like day 15 or some shit like that. And like
Day 15.
quarantine.
Coronavirus 2020.
I think I'm gonna start a journal. What do you think?
Start a journal.
Yeah, just start writing down like things.
What is the level of self-distancing that you're doing? Are you quarantining yourself, or are you like living? So
I am in the apartment. I do not leave. I've left a few times to get groceries. That's about it. And when I go to get groceries, I'm wearing my N95 mask. It's like, no, I ordered one, but it's not going to come until like fucking coronavirus is over. I'm just like washing my hands a lot and trying not to touch shit, trying not to touch my face. And even though as we speak right now, I'm touching my face. So I don't know. How about you? Are you in it?
I'm in it. I live in Manhattan. I mean, Brooklyn right now has more cases than Manhattan, I think. Last time I checked.
Yep.
You guys have a bit more, but it's virtually the same at this point.
It's bad everywhere. Yeah.
It's pretty bad everywhere. I think Staten Island has the least, but I mean that's because their population is the lowest. I live next to a hospital, as I think I've said about 5 million times during the show, and that's why there's so many sirens in the background. I live next to a hospital, so it's still kind of vibrant where I live, meaning that there's still a lot of commuters, like healthcare workers, that are going back and forth around me. But everything else is pretty much done. Like I was downtown where my girlfriend lives. It looks morbid. We were walking around the other night. It was on Saturday night or Friday night. It was last Friday. We were taking a walk around her neighborhood, and
just to stretch your legs a little bit.
Yeah, just to move around, and it was depressing. Like it was one of the most depressing moments I've ever witnessed in New York. Like all these small businesses closed, no one on the street, youths smoking pot in Washington Square Park. Those damn Utes.
Talk about social distancing.
Talking about social distancing. But yeah, I go out sometimes, usually just to run or work out. That's pretty much it. I'm not really going into stores anymore, even though I did the other day. Even though I do like 3 times a day. No, but I mean, I'm still going outside. I'm not completely quarantined. However, there's really nowhere to go anyway. Like, what am I supposed to do? Like,
Exactly.
I just go play with rocks somewhere. Like, I go out. I'll go to the park for maybe like an hour and a half a day, and then I'll come back. But I'm probably going to try to get out of the city this weekend. How about yourself? Like, what's your plans?
I'm in it for the long haul. I don't have anywhere else to go anyway. I mean, the closest family I have is in New Jersey, and it's pretty much the same situation, where they're at. So, just gonna stick to where I am.
What about your significant other right now? What is?
Yeah, I mean, we're just a few blocks away from each other, so I bounce between the two every now and again. That's how I get my exercise. But we're quarantined in my apartment, meaning nobody in or out from outside of us, and then her roommates are doing the same. So yeah,
it's nuts. Like, I feel like I'm doing a pretty good job quarantining myself, but like, it's so boring. I think I last episode I mentioned that I'm basically living in my own fart stank.
Yep.
So it's become so here's a funny story. So the way that I picked up my my girlfriend, the pickup line that I used was a Harry Potter reference.
Okay.
I think I said to her when I first met her, I'm looking for I'm just a regular Cedric Diggory looking for my Cho Chang. You have permission to steal it, anyone, if you want to steal that. If you're a Harry Potter, because it's a good pickup line. Because a lot of people like Harry Potter. So I'm just a Cedric Diggory looking for my Cho Chang, and that worked. We've been together for almost 2 years at this point. So where the hell was I going with this? Oh yeah, well she called me Henry Potter for a very long time.
Henry Potter?
So, yeah, she called me Henry Potter. You know how girls, they'll always put, when they first meet a guy, they'll always put they'll always give them a nickname, or they'll always refer to that person with their friends as a nickname. So, they'll call them like headphones or something. Like, oh, is headphones coming out? So
Right.
I was Henry Potter. So now it's Henry Potter and the Chamber of Farts. Henry Potter and the Chamber of Farts.
Yeah, I mean, that's funny because now that you mention it, my girlfriend's ex-roommate was dating a social studies teacher, and they referred to him as social studies.
Social studies.
Yeah.
You couldn't come up with a more inventive name. Just social. I guess that's social studies. Everyone knows that is a distinctive
it
like
rolled
job
off the
to
tongue,
have, like
you
the
know,
social
like-
studies.
Yeah, it rolled off the tongue. I thought it was pretty cool. He was a nice dude too. He was cool. I liked him.
Do you think that you have any nicknames? Like, if you had a nickname?
For me, Jesus. I
Yeah,
don't know.
what do you think it would be?
Typical liberal.
No,
No, I'm kidding. I don't know. Maybe I should ask.
I know for a fact that I'm definitely tall guy.
Yeah,
For
probably.
like the vast majority of girls I've dated, I'm
Yeah,
probably a tall guy.
I would say that, but like compared to you, I'm not. Like for context, what are you, like 6'5" or something like that?
I'm 6'5".
Yeah, exactly. I'm like 6, almost 2. You make me look small.
Yeah, so I'm pretty certain that I'm a tall guy. But yeah, I've been keeping busy with my puzzle.
Your puzzle.
My puzzle. I need to complete it. Yeah, I've been working on a 750 piece puzzle, and it's a nightmare and also a pleasure at the same time. It is a puzzle of a dog on a toilet reading a newspaper, and yeah, that's my life. My life is that puzzle. So if it were to be taken,
my girlfriend adopted 5 kittens. Well, not adopted, but we're fostering them. So we have a bunch of kittens. So that's been fun.
that's fun.
Yeah.
Speaking of kittens, and this will go really off tangent if we go further into this. I just watched Don't Fuck with Cats.
Oh yeah, that's fucking crazy. I didn't like that. No.
And I had a hard time falling asleep because I watched it at like 2 a.m.
Yeah. No,
and I
didn't
watched
like
the
it at all.
entire series in one stretch, and it was deeply disturbing, but it was
Yeah.
very good. It was one of the best documentaries I saw in a while.
Yeah. I don't recommend it. I liked it, but I don't recommend it. It's stressful. I don't like it.
It's good. It's interesting,
Yep.
and they don't show any of the bad stuff
Oh.
on screen. But
They
yeah,
come pretty
let's let's start getting into it. Yeah, Corona sucks, as you guys know. It's not fun being quarantined into your home. I'm sure a lot of you listening right now are probably in some type of similar circumstance where you're either in your home trying to figure out something to do. Now's a good time to pick up a hobby or read a book or do something productive. Don't develop bad habits while you're in this stage. Develop good habits, like things that are productive, skills, read. Take some books off your reading list, because the last thing you want to do is just
Squander the time. Yeah.
pick up a habit of playing video games for 18 hours a day and jerking off. Like that's what you don't want to do.
Right. No.
But I'm happy to hear that the last episode that we put out got a pretty good response from a lot of the people who give us like fair critique and always give honest feedback to our shows. And I'm happy to hear that you liked our tangents on our later tangent on Rome, on ancient Rome, because that's like a super interesting topic that I've always found really interesting. About 5 or 6 years ago, I was really into reading about it. I have forgotten more about that subject than I know right now, unfortunately. Of course, the movie Gladiator, if you've seen Gladiator.
Yeah, I mean, who hasn't seen Gladiator?
Father of a murdered son, husband of a murdered wife, and I will have my vengeance in this life for the next. Most badass monologue of all time ever written. Russell Crowe in that moment is the most ultimate badass on screen ever.
Yep.
When Marcus Aurelius confronts Commodus in the arena.
I might
You
have
all
to
know what I'm
watch that
talking
tonight.
about. But yeah, that topic was super. I think this ties into a lot what we're going to talk about today. There is like a couple of points where I was like referencing like Roman neocons, and of course the guy who I said would favor the destruction of Carthage at the end of every Senate meeting, and I couldn't remember his name, and it was driving me crazy. So I was like, who was the guy who used to say this during these Senate meetings in Rome? And I ended up doing a quick Google search, and Cato the Elder popped right up. And Cato the Elder, not not Cato the Younger, the famous Cato that we all know, like that the Cato Institute is named after, is Cato the Younger. But Cato the Elder used to end every single meeting by saying, "Moreover, I am of the opinion that Carthage ought to be destroyed," no matter what he would talk about. So it could be anything. It could be something on, like, they're talking about like harvest,
Right.
or just
Harvests
domestic
are down and the locusts are up. Moreover, I am of the opinion that Carthage ought to be destroyed. Thank you very much.
Yeah, it'd be at the end of it, like having a meeting, like during a hearing, like a U.S. senator at the end of every meeting, like, I'm of the opinion that we must sack and destroy all of Iran. And meanwhile they're talking about like healthcare policy or tax policy, like, and I am the opinion that we must destroy Iran.
Yeah,
but
doesn't sound too far off from the actual reality.
Yeah, it doesn't really. It's really not that far off from like the current reality.
Yeah.
But I thought that was interesting, and I had to look it up. And then I went into like a bit of a frenzy, just kind of like refreshing myself on Roman history.
Right.
Cato the Younger is like the guy that we all learn about. Like the Cato Institute is named after Cato the Younger, which is Cato the Elder's grandson. And you know about Cato the Younger. He was like one of Julius Caesar's biggest rivals, or I wouldn't call him a rival, but biggest critic. He was like very pro-republic. Cato, he was very pro-republic, and he was incredibly concerned about Julius Caesar and the power that he was accumulating at the time.
Right.
Because Julius Caesar eventually became a military dictator.
Right.
And if you guys know the end about, what happens to Cato and Julius Caesar is, of course, assassinated by the Roman Senate. And
Brutus.
Brutus! Oh. Brutus!
A2 Brutus.
A2 Brutus, yeah. In the most dramatized assassination of all time.
Yeah.
You guys should watch the show Rome. Have you ever watched Rome?
It's pretty good, actually, yeah.
It's very good. It's some of the most realistic, or at least I like to think, realistic, like, battle scenes I've ever seen in, like, cinematized. Like, it wasn't like overly climactic, but it was
believable.
It was incredibly believable, the way that they portrayed like a Roman legion fighting Gallic tribesmen. But what happened to Cato is that Cato ended up killing himself.
Yeah, in a
I'm not
badass
laughing.
way too.
He killed himself in a badass way. He stabbed himself, but he didn't get the job done when he stabbed himself.
Right.
So kind of like Tojo in Japan.
Yeah.
At the end of World War II, Tojo, who was the military dictator of the Japanese Empire, he tried to kill himself, but he missed. he missed. And he was obviously trying to kill himself because he was about to be picked up by the Allies and tried for war crimes. And he botched his suicide. And
tried to commit seppuku, basically.
He was eventually tried, and he was later hung. But yeah, he didn't even try to do that. He shot himself. He didn't try to do seppuku. He didn't stab himself. He shot himself. He shot himself in the stomach, but he missed his bodily organs that would kill him.
Van Gogh was the same way, actually, too. I mean, Van Gogh had some fucked up problems in his head, but he shot himself in the stomach, and basically he just writhed in pain for like days or weeks. I forget exactly, but he eventually died. But like, he was alive the whole time and just died really slowly. So Cato kind of did the same shit.
According to Plutarch, whenever you want to sound smart in a conversation, just reference Plutarch. Well,
Plutarch.
it was Plutarch who said that democracy only lives in a certain, just always reference Plutarch. Well, it was Plutarch who said, Cato did not immediately die of the wound, but struggling, fell off the bed, and throwing down a little mathematical table that stood by, made such a noise that servants, hearing it, cried out. And immediately his son and all of his friends came into the chamber, where seeing him lie weltering in his own blood, great part of his bowels out of his body, but himself still alive and able to look at them, they all stood in horror. The physician went to him and would have put in his bowels, which were not pierced, and sewed up the wound. But Cato, recovering himself and understanding the intention, thrust away the physician, plucked at his own bowels, and tearing open the wound, immediately expired. That's fucking
crazy.
That's gross. So he tried to kill himself. Boss shit. Somebody is being taken to the hospital for corona. That's how serious it is up in New York.
Yeah, this is probably going to happen a few times.
Yeah. So, if you're hearing sirens in the background, we are in a pandemic zone, so that is to be expected. But yeah, Plutarch definitely did not immediately regretted that decision. He's like, yeah, no. I immediately regret this. But yeah, he had to kill himself because Julius Caesar was obviously going to, string him out. But the other guy, of course, we were talking about Scipio Africanus, who has a really long lineage in Roman history, where it's like Scipio's father died from Hannibal, and then Scipio, he beat Hannibal in Africa, and he was then named Scipio Africanus, and then his grandson is the guy who eventually sacked Carthage for the third and final time, where they essentially just did total warfare, and they destroyed Carthage completely and salted the land and destroyed all the infrastructure, and really just made sure that Carthage, there was no Marshall Plan in Carthage. There was no plan or there was no plan to give them foreign aid afterwards and rebuild them in the image of Rome.
I'm sure Cato was super happy about it.
I'm sure Cato was super happy about that, but they completely sacked that city, and really Plutarch is the guy who a lot of these studies or a lot of this historical context is taken from. He was a primary writer, and he was dead. I mean, Plutarch wrote all this stuff after these events already happened by centuries. But
he wrote the book.
he wrote the book about all this stuff.
Right.
But apparently Roman officers and Roman generals were crying. It was so bad. They were crying, and they were like, this is going to foreshadow the end of Rome. This has happened to Carthage, which is one of the great civilizations on earth of all time at this point. And this will probably have happened to us eventually. So they were in tears when this was going on. It was that devastating. That was a type of sack. Think Mongolians at Baghdad type of sack. It's a all-out devastating, brutal war. But the reason why I'm bringing this up is because peel that back. You go back to the Punic Wars, which we were talking about briefly last episode, when Hannibal, the Punic Wars, Hannibal goes over the Alps, really has it out for the Romans, recruits a bunch of Gallic and Italian allies. When he gets to the other side, he goes through the Alps with his war elephants. A lot of those war elephants die, but he's such a skilled general that he basically wrecks every fucking Roman general there is on the battlefield. He just wrecks them. Just these terrible battles. The Roman consul is killed. One of the Roman consuls is killed in battle. This is bad. This is oh shit. This is the oh shit moment. So this wasn't a new phenomenon in Rome, but it certainly was one of the last times this happened in Rome before, later dictators took place. The Roman court, they handed out all of their power to a guy named Fabius. Mm-hmm. And Fabius was a military dictator that they gave him all power to essentially deal with Hannibal, to save the Roman Republic as they knew it at the time, because Hannibal was coming. And what he implemented was the Fabian Strategy. And the Fabian Strategy is kind of like what we're doing right now with coronavirus when you think about it. So the Fabian Strategy was that you never, no one's going to beat Hannibal. No one's going to beat him in an open battle. This guy is too good of a general. His cavalry is too strong. If you look at Roman history, they always get their asses kicked by cavalry units,
by horse people,
with horse people. Whenever they travel out east, when they leave Africa and they start going into the steppe, they get stomped. They get stomped by all the horseback people, or people with light cavalry who have archery, who have trained archers. That's when they leave their comfort zone to get smacked. When they go up to Europe, when they were fighting Europe, and they were fighting Germanic and Gallic and Celtic and Celtic and Gallic and Germanic tribes, they would stomp them because they would be fighting in open battlefields or forestry, like favorable terms. And, they did what they did. They'd build forts and all that stuff. Like the Roman soldiers were like building forts as they would go to war.
Right.
Like they were engineer. Like a Roman soldier was an engineer at the same time as being a soldier. It was pretty crazy. But they handed all this power to this guy Fabius. Fabius implemented the strategy where basically you would never engage. You would just disrupt their supply chain. That was what you did. You disrupted their supply chain. You made sure that they couldn't feed themselves. Mm-hmm. You made sure that they couldn't take refuge in a nearby city. Right. And what the policy that was put in place for Roman citizens is that if you saw or if you knew that Hannibal was going to come or he was close to you, total scorched earth policy. You destroy your crops. You destroy anything of value that they can pick up as a resource. And then your ass is back inside your town. You lock all the doors and you hope Hannibal doesn't come to, scorch you, to, eat you.
Basically, shelter in place.
shelter in place. But, that consisted of destroying all of your crops so he wouldn't be able to live off the land.
Right.
So that was a strategy that took place. Eventually, that lasted for decades. It lasted for about 18 years, 17 years. 16, 17 years that lasted. He was roaming around Italy, living off the land. Italians would have to run back into their forts, and the Roman legions, after they got their asses handed, they would just disrupt supply chain type stuff. Now, they ended up losing eventually because there was no way that Hannibal was going to be able to sack the fortified city of Rome. Mm-hmm. With so much supply chain ruptures in the process. And he was eventually defeated by this guy named Scipio Africanus, as I said before. George Washington used the Fabian strategy as well, right?
Right.
So that's like a common...
Student. Mm-hmm.
He was a student. I mean, that's how we knocked the British out.
Yep.
George Washington was like 3-6. In his battles, like with outward confrontation against the British armies, like that doesn't even get you to the playoffs in like the NFC East.
Yeah.
You don't even get to the playoffs in the NFC East with that record.
No.
So, but we were able to win that war, and because of home field advantage, and
he won the battles that counted, and he knew how to maneuver people. Exactly, with the home field advantage. Stick a bunch of Minutemen in the forest and murder people.
What was interesting about Fabian though is that what I found a correlation was that Fabius apparently, when he first took power, he blamed it on the gods. He was like, "Oh, it's the gods. We have to appease them somehow," and they ended up sacrificing a following year's harvest. So they're like, we must sacrifice the harvest, Italy's harvest, in order to please the gods. That's why our consul, the consul was like, there's 2 consuls in Rome at this time. They assign people who hate each other, so one can't gain more power than the other. So it's like getting Donald Trump and maybe Chuck Schumer as president at the same time. 2 guys who don't like Pelosi. Each other. Yeah, exactly. That type of thing. That's how they constructed their government. So when he handed over that power, he eventually gave the power back to the Roman Senate, and Rome remains a republic for many decades afterwards, until there was a guy named Sulla, who was like the other really big famous Roman dictator, who through a civil war he marched on Rome and he became the new dictator of Rome and had absolute rule. And, he eventually gave the power back, but, Sulla, landing troops into the Roman capital eventually set the precedent for Julius Caesar to do so in the future.
Right.
Where Julius Caesar did, he was assassinated, then his heir apparent, Augustus Caesar, gets into about a power struggle with his former right-hand man, Mark Antony and Cleopatra, and eventually becomes the emperor of Rome, and that system lasts about four centuries before it eventually, or at least the Western Roman Empire eventually falls to a number of things, but ultimately the Visigoths marching in there and booting them out and crowning themselves. But
so you mentioned at the top of this conversation, like, there was a kind of relationship to the current situation for coronavirus. So can you like bring us back to that point? Like, why are we talking about Rome right now?
So the reason I wanted to bring that out is because there's obviously a lot of chit-chatting going on about what measures that people should take and what are some of the precautions that the U.S. should, what are the worst case scenarios in the U.S. as far as like how our governments ran from day to day. What would happen if all of our bureaucratic leaders got sick and were unable to serve in their offices? Like, what would
Mitt
happen?
Romney's good.
Mitt Romney's in self-quarantine.
No, I know, but he's good. He's negative. Rand Paul, not so much though. He's got it. He's got the corona.
He's got it, but he's he doesn't have symptoms.
Yes, he's still got it though.
he's got it. He's not sick from it. He's carrying the virus.
I just think it's
got tested
ironic.
because he got tested because he was traveling, not because he was feeling symptoms of it.
Well, here's the thing about that. So like, apparently he voted against doing a stimulus initially because he's Rand Paul. Obviously he's going to vote against it, right? But then he meets up with a bunch of people that ultimately end up self-quarantining themselves, and he's saying, oh, this is a bunch of hoopla, whatever. He's going to the gym, he's working out in a pool, and he gets tested and then does all of those things, so
I heard that was bullshit though.
No, this is absolutely true. You don't get tested because you don't think you don't have it. You get tested because you think you might.
No, I heard the stories of him. Rand Paul's denying that he did all that stuff after he was tested. He
was filmed doing it.
Oh,
there's proof of it. Yeah, he did this one speech right after he left the pool, and you can see his hair is still wet. He absolutely was just running around and doing stuff, and it's just fucking reckless, really, because again, you don't take this test because you don't think you have. I wouldn't take this test right now. Why? Because I know I don't have it, and I know that I have no risk in taking it, and it's just irresponsible for me to take up a test when other people actually need it. So the idea that he took this test just as a precaution is kind of silly. And if he even had the inkling, just the thought that maybe he might have been in contact with it, which he probably got at CPAC or some shit like that, right? It's irresponsible of him to just run around and, do all this shit in Congress and infect all the other boomers there who are at higher risks of dying for that. And then his test come back and he's positive. So it's all right, you might not be sick from it.
Then it was good that he got tested though. So
it was totally good, but it was irresponsible of him to not self-quarantine if he had the inkling thought that he had it. He's part of the problem. He's part of the reason why this is spreading so quickly, because people that are super asymptomatic are the ones that are making this move around faster. As a matter of fact, in Iceland has a super small population, and they're moving to test literally everyone in Iceland, and they can probably do that because, again, super small population.
There's
what they found
20 people who live there.
I mean, it's a lot more than 20 people. We're talking about millions of people, but still
24.
Not nearly as many as here or in China or Italy or something like that. But the point is, millions of people are getting tested, and what they're finding out is that some ridiculous percentage, I don't actually know the right percentage, I'm not going to say it out loud because I don't want to sound like a fucking idiot, but some large percentage of people that tested positive were asymptomatic, right? And so the problem isn't, oh yeah, I'm not going to get this disease or whatever, yada yada. The problem is that you have it and you're asymptomatic, and then you spread it to other people because you don't think you have it. So the self-quarantining thing, the social distancing thing, this shit makes sense, right? It's stop being selfish and only thinking about yourself. What Rand Paul probably did was infect other people because of his actions.
Rand Paul's kind of like it's kind of like Charlie Brown. He's always getting, I'm trying to think. Who is the guy from Hey Arnold? Eugene from Hey Arnold, who always gets hurt. Remember when he got speared by his neighbor?
I don't remember that episode, but I can
No,
believe it.
no. In real life, Rand Paul got into a fight with his neighbor. Apparently, his neighbor speared him. They were in a
Speared him, like threw a spear at him, or
no, like
like what are you talking about?
like football tackled him.
Oh, okay.
Like
I thought you meant like somebody threw a fucking javelin at him or some shit. That would be hilarious.
No, as far as I know, that didn't escalate that far. But apparently, he got into a fight with his neighbor, and well, he did get into a fight with his neighbor because he's suing him right now, and he was in the hospital because of it. So it wasn't alleged; he did, and they got into it. It wasn't like a fight over politics; it was a fight over like property. Like they were.
Hey,
I'm just imagining this whole situation playing out, and it's funny to me because Rand Paul was probably like, this is. He probably said something about private property, like this is private property,
right.
We're a nation of private property. The Constitution, and then the guy's like, "Oh, fuck you," and then like Luke completely lost his cool.
Yeah.
So I'm just thinking of how exactly that played out, but I mean, he's Captain Accident, but yeah, I don't know the full story. I heard Rand Paul's statement saying that he didn't do it, but I didn't hear about the evidence that you just brought up.
There's photo and video.
I'll take your. I trust you as somebody who delivers not nonsense, but yeah, the reason why bringing this up is because what will happen if like the government just ceases to exist, and like what are the backup plans as far as like setting up a Marshall Plan in the U.S. because we have guys like Bill de Blasio, who claims that Trump is Hitler, saying that Trump should be marching the military down in New York. Hey, Hitler should be marching the military in New York. Like
yeah.
Okay.
A little bit of cognitive dissonance.
Isn't he a Nazi? Isn't he a Nazi? Isn't Trump a Nazi? Yeah, that Nazi should be bringing the military to my city. That fucking Nazi. He's not being.
He's not being Nazi enough. That's funny.
And Trump apparently is I don't want to say reluctant. He said he doesn't want to do that for now. Trump has kind of given autonomy to the governors of each state for now. That's kind of like been his words, like you're on your own on this for now.
Like here's some money, figure this shit out. Shut up, don't ask me questions.
Yeah, he's kind of doing that, and I actually, and it's for now is like the key word, like I doesn't mean that I can't do it in the future, which I think is a good thing because I do not think that the military should be coming into cities and essentially helping. Providing doing law enforcement, that would be bad if the military started doing law enforcement. Now, like what the plan is, I don't want to say like I want to first outline like what is supposed to happen.
Right.
The military is supposed to come in and do. There's a lot of positions in the military other than just killing people.
Yeah, totally.
there's more than just like snipers in the military.
Right. Army Corps of Engineers comes to mind for this.
Yeah, there's engineers and there's health services and there's people who do a lot of other services.
And they could also provide logistics and shit like that.
And logistics,
transportation, shit like that. So
they're coming in to do stuff like that, as far like provide health services, help work. Turn these facilities in New York from
the Jacob Javits Center to a hospital.
Yeah, like they're turning like homeless centers into quarantine zones, and I think that's right. It sounds so wrong when you say that. Homeless centers into quarantine zones.
Aren't they kind of already?
They're quarantining the homeless people in the homeless shelters there. Like they're not letting them leave. Which they probably shouldn't let them leave when there's no corona. No, I'm joking.
No.
I'm joking.
No.
If you've seen a New York City homeless person, you would agree for a moment, and then you would come to your senses and be like, "That's not PC. I shouldn't say that out loud."
No.
But just come to New York City and observe our homeless. You'll change your mind. No, I'm joking. I don't actually mean that. I do mean it. I don't mean that.
All right, that's enough.
I 100% do mean it. I don't mean that. So, yeah, they're coming in to like transform things into places where they could potentially provide services that they learned in the military and all of that. But then there's this article that came out the other day.
Yep.
That I found pretty compelling by William Arnett. And basically, he was on the Scott Horton show the other day, and
Friday,
on Friday. So it got me interested in this, and it's basically about the emergency plan that the U.S. military will take if the civilian government is incapacitated. You read the article, right?
Yep, read it.
And like, can you save me the time of paraphrasing it so I don't have to ramble on like an idiot?
Yeah, totally. Basically what he goes over is talking about how what's going to happen, if the government can't do its job as a result of this coronavirus. We kind of got into a side tangent there talking about Rand Paul, but kind of the same idea stands. If a bunch of people get sick, or more likely, if the contagion spreads so fast and becomes such a problem that now Congress can't actually meet to legislate, what's the backup plan, right? And so the backup plan, and there's many of them, is in a nutshell, the government must continue to operate under all circumstances, right? Like, regardless of what happens, we must keep the government running. And they've got some pretty interesting plans that that the author here, Bill Arkin, I think it was. I think
William Arkin, not Arnett.
Yeah. So Bill Arkin, he talks about a bunch of different plans, and they range from kind of moving all of the military folks and all of the national security folks to like bunkers in Maryland or in Pennsylvania and shit, so that they can operate
bunkers in New Zealand.
But also moving the Supreme Court and like figuring out how to do like remote legislation, and those are kind of like the like not so crazy sounding ones, but there are some like top secret contingency plans apparently, where the government and specifically the military would step into place. And just reading this kind of sounds a lot like martial law, where they would basically run shit, right? And he points out, and I'm going to read this one quote here because I think it's important. So he says, "We're in new territory," says one senior officer. "The entire post-9/11 paradigm of emergency planning thrown out the window." The officer jokes, in the kind of morbid human characteristic of this slow-moving disaster, that America had better learn who General Terrence J. O'Shaughnessy is. He is
O'Shaughnessy.
O'Shag Hennessy.
O'Shag Hennessy.
Balake! Hey, Ron.
Hey, Balake!
All right, so who's this guy, Terrence O'Shag Hennessy? He's the, in the same quote, he's the combatant commander for the United States and would, in theory, be in charge if Washington were eviscerated. That is, until a new civilian leader could be installed. So, basically, this guy is the head of North Command.
You know how like there's different commands.
NOCOM, SOCOM.
Yeah.
Northcom.
There's Northcom for us. Like there's a plan for. I mean, there's plans for everything. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
there's a fucking plan to.
There's plans to.
You can't hate on it. I'm just saying there's literally plans for everything.
Right.
We were talking about this last episode, I think, right? Like just like different plans, like Germany invading the U.S. and Japan invading the U.S. and like all these wacky plans and all this. Mm-hmm. We were kind of flirting and talking about that on our last episode, if I can recall.
You got to have the plan, otherwise you're going to get caught with your pants down if shit hits the fan, So like
we have a plan to fucking invade Canada if it comes to it. You know that. Like we have a plan to fucking
I'm certain.
Level Toronto.
Yeah.
If it came to it.
I'm certain. But so this guy O'Shag Hennessy, I'm going to call him O'Shag Hennessy because it's funny. Air Force General. He's the Northcom's Colorado Springs based commander. So basically, in a nutshell, what this guy is saying is, if shit hits the fan and government can't work, and we're down to like our second string, maybe even our third string politicians, the military is going to step in and implement what looks a lot like a martial law, which they will basically police the United States. Now, if you're freaking out about this, I just want to point out like why this exists as a precedent. So one example was during the Civil Rights Movement, when segregation was abolished, the United States actually used the military to enforce desegregation, right? Because there are many places, specifically in the Deep South, where, they had police and they understood that segregation is now abolished, but they refused to enforce that law. And so therefore the military stepped in and forced them to, right? So like it's been used for like good things, but I guess, kind of the the scary parts about this is like, oh shit, what happens?
It was used in the LA riots.
Right, exactly. So like nobody knows who Oshag Hennessy is. Like he's some random Air Force general that nobody knows about, right? But he could potentially be in charge because
he
he's
could
in charge of
potentially be your warlord.
Right. No, literally, like quite literally, he could be the warlord, right? So look him up. I don't know. I didn't really get a chance to like dig into him, and I'm sure there's probably not a ton about him just yet. But but that's part of those secret plans, right? And I think what's pretty interesting about this is that talking about our like historical tangents. I mean, we were talking about how military leaders like Fabius, would come into power, right, and basically rule with an iron fist,
Fabius gave up his power.
Yeah,
and honestly,
ultimately he did. Yeah, ultimately he absolutely did, right?
Fabius gave up his power. I would be more someone like later Roman dictators who enforced more stringent laws and didn't give up power as fast as someone like Cato would like. I think that trend would hold true for the United States military. Like I don't think that honestly. There's a lot of military guys who listen to this show, and I would love to hear your feedback. I'm pretty sure that most people in the U.S. military would not feel comfortable at all occupying fucking New York City.
Right.
You know what I mean? Like that would be weird.
And
like,
he points this out too. Like Bill Arkin, like he was on Scott Horton's show on Friday, and he literally prefaced the entire conversation by saying like, yo, the military's just as afraid about this as we might be learning about this. Like they're not trying to, they're just worried about their kids and their family and shit like that, just like we all are. There's no like, as far as he understands and as far as everyone understands, like everybody in the military is just trying to do the right thing, and figure shit out just like we all are. Right. So I don't think there's any like nasty coup idea.
No, there's no nasty coup idea.
It's not anything like that, but it's fun to explore, kind of like these historical parallels. And, we talked a lot about Rome, but actually my roommate was, we're fucking bored here, so we're doing nothing but reading. And he came across like an old history.com like article about the French Revolution. And dude, when I tell you there was so many parallels to like what's going on now, and specifically around like relying on the military, to hold together, the Republic basically. I think looking at the French Revolution might be pretty interesting. So I kind of want to jump into that if you don't mind.
Yeah, and just to, I guess, solidify that, like, I definitely don't think that there is a realistic, like, military coup that's going on. Like, the U.S. is not a banana republic. No. We're not, the U.S. isn't fucking Egypt, where military leader is just like, okay, I guess we have a new ruler today. We voted wrong, so we ended up voting wrong. The military had to take over. Like, we're not
get me a Heshemite king quick.
Like the president is the commander in chief. Like if they give you an order, like you do the order.
Right.
So I wouldn't really be in fear of that, but it's interesting to look at those.
Right.
Those plans, because there are plans to do that, because you never know. It's always, there's a show called Lone Survivor.
Yeah.
I've never actually watched it, but I know what it's about. It's about the actual lone survivor of, if everyone in government died, like who is that designated lone survivor who you hide away to be president?
Yeah, totally.
There's always those contingency plans that are put in place if the hierarchy is completely abolished. But
it's like, I'm the energy secretary. I'm 63rd in the line for the presidency.
Hey, I mean, George Washington, it wasn't exactly like a military dictator or anything, but I mean, he was a famous general who was elected president. I mean, He was a son of the Enlightenment, but if the guy had more aggressive tendencies and was more, if he was like that, he wouldn't have been the person who became president, who would have garnered the support from his peers who were very much, in favor of liberal republic constitutional type governments. But who knows? Let's just say King George was shocked when he said that he was going to not become a king of America.
Yep.
Like King George said to his painter, I believe, his portraitist or whatever you call him, that if his portraitist, I'll just call him that, said that, I hear George Washington is not going to crown himself king of America. And King George III's like, if he does that, he shall be the greatest man who ever lived.
George Washington's great context for this because, in the same time, of the American Revolution, the French Revolution is going on at the same time. And obviously they're very closely linked, So I want to read this one part of this History Channel article because when my roommate was now, all right, I'm pretty liberal, but my roommate is much, much more liberal. And I think he has it in his head that, we're going to devolve into some kind of crazy ass revolution. I disagree, but when he read this to me and then he took out his iPad and his little Apple Pencil and he scratched out, some of the words and replaced them with like contemporary words, I was like, oh shit, you might have a point here. So I'm going to read them. I'm going to read the original and then I'm going to read it again with the amendments that he made. So causes of the French Revolution. As the 18th century drew to a close, France's costly involvement in the American Revolution and extravagant spending by King Louis the XVI, what is that, 16th? King Louis the 16th and his predecessor had left the country on the brink of bankruptcy. Not only were the royal coffers depleted, but 2 decades of poor harvests, drought, cattle disease, and skyrocketing bread prices had kindled unrest among the peasants and urban poor. Many expressed their desperation and resentment towards a regime that imposed heavy taxes, yet failed to provide any relief by rioting, looting, and striking. Okay, so if you didn't already catch, where I'm going to go with this one, I'm going to replace some of these words with the American versions, the contemporary American versions. All right. As the 2010s drew to a close, America's costly involvement in the war on terror and extravagant spending by President Donald Trump and his predecessor had left the country on the brink of bankruptcy. Whoa. Not only were the public coffers depleted, but 2 decades of poor financial policy and skyrocketing healthcare prices had kindled unrest among the workers and urban poor. Many expressed their desperation and resentment towards a administration that imposed heavy taxes, yet failed to provide any relief by rioting, looting, and striking. So,
what's interesting though is that your friend who did this is you said he's a lefty, but I'm a whatever you want to call it, a libertarian type, paleo conservative libertarian, however you want to label it, and I agree completely with what his crossing, what he crossed out. Like I can't argue anything that he said. Yeah,
I think the consequences of these similarities you would probably differ on, right?
No, I think the consequent, like, why we probably have like disagreements on like why healthcare is so expensive, and like, but that's pretty much it. Like, I probably would agree with him a lot on foreign policy. I agree with, like, as you and I agree on a lot.
Yeah,
we
totally
disagree on a lot. Like, I'm more of a libertarian. Danny's more of a liberal progressive, and we agree a lot. And most of the show is us agreeing and then debating sometimes and
on the gritty details. Yeah,
yeah, but I get along with progressives quite well because I feel like progressives and a lot of like good leftists. I'm not talking about like your MSNBC watching Rachel Maddow fans. Right. I'm talking about like good leftists who are like actually progressives and who don't obsess over like identity politics, like transgender, black rights, like the ones who care about like labor rights and stuff. And libertarians have a lot in common. I think a lot of times you see a lot of people go from one school to the other. Like Thomas Sowell was a Marxist before he became like a conservative libertarian, and you see that a lot with a lot of like academics. Like, they are on one side and they gravitate towards the other. I think it has to do because they identify a lot of the problems. They just have different
They just
either
disagree with the
reasons or
solutions,
solutions and,
yeah.
and things like that. And that's where that's where the diverges come from. Because as much as of a libertarian and disagreements I have with progressives on economic policy as I do have, I do agree with a lot of the points that they bring up, and a lot of the like kind of conservative talking points where they're like, oh, lazy millennial lefty loser, all they want is everything is for free. They're just hippies who just think they're privileged to everything, and they just want free everything. I don't think that's true about the majority of progressives or liberals. I don't think that they're seeking handouts. I think that they just want easier access to a dignified life, because it's hard to when you compare living standards with, let's just say, a millennial, and they completely screwed up millennials' time frame. Now people use millennial as for people who are like 19 years old, and I don't even think they fall under the millennial bracket. Like, we're millennials. You and I are millennials. Yeah. People who are in their late 20s at this point too, like late 30s, are considered millennials. Now it means like 18-year-olds who play Fortnite. Right. Like, non-boomers. Like I don't even know where that how that definition they keep
broadening that base and lumping
they keep on broadening that. Millennial is basically just like a derogatory term for people who like
people under 30,
people under 30 who are into
not even under 30,
like
under 40.
latte coffee. They're like, oh, you damn millennials with your lattes. Back in my day, we just drink whiskey. It's a
derogatory term. You're absolutely right. It's the hegemony of like the old guard, right? And they're realizing that this new wave of this new generation, and I'm using that term very loosely, is making changes, and they don't like it, so they just label everyone that's like under 40 years old a millennial.
But you see the other thing happening, like younger people are calling everyone who's older boomers. Like, oh, fucking boomer, fucking boomer. Okay, boomer. Like, that's their version, because I guess when you're when you're being made fun of and
when you're called a lazy millennial, you gotta fire back sometimes.
Well, here's the thing. Boomers have it. They complain about how they have worked for everything that they had, like a lot of boomers, and I'm kind of like painting people with a broad brush right here. Everyone is different. Everyone has different like ideology, and you got to judge people on a case by case basis. But I'm talking about the stereotypical boomer who's like, oh, these stupid millennial liberal losers. They didn't work for anything in their life. They just want handouts and handouts. Man, I work with pretty much mostly millennials, people in between the ages of 25 to 40 years old. Primary people who I work with in my professional life, and it's not like that. Like, I can tell you right now, like my peers who I work with work their fucking asses off, and I know that's a small sample size, but people my age work really hard. People our age work very hard, Danny. I think you would agree with that. You work your asses off. I know for a fact you work your ass off all the time. You're and you could be thrown in a bucket as a lazy millennial. That's not true. You work your fucking ass off, and you bring a lot of value to whatever organization that you're involved in because you're talented. So I think that like broad range stigma is not fair. On the flip side, there's a lot of boomers who, that's where you got 9 to 5 from. They work their 40 hours a week. Like, goddamn, if we worked 40 hours a week, Danny.
Came from the boomers, right? Like fucking boomers did a lot of really great things for this country, like without a doubt. And there's this one book that my roommate's reading that I've been meaning to pick up. It's eluding me right now, but the basic premise of the book is like every generation has this generational transition, right? Where the new current generation tries to optimize, for the previous generation, and the new generation forgets what the previous generation did to get them there, and the current the old generation, they forget what it was like to be in that transition, right? And they forget that they were the ones pushing everything forward, and they just kind of sit and rest on their laurels, and they think they've done it all. But and this is a cycle that goes on and on. Specifically, it tracks in the United States here, but I'm sure we can do a case study on pretty much everywhere in the world. throughout all of history, you know.
Well, here's the thing, Danny. Again, I'm painting a very broad brush right here. Is like, yeah, of course, every generation has people who contribute a lot. There are clear differences between our times, and there's different challenges in both of our generations that we have to face with people who are above the age of 50 or so. I don't really even know what the clear divide is for what a baby boomer consists of. And I mean, I always thought it referred to the children of the people who came back from World War II who had a bunch of kids and moved into the suburbs. Like, I always thought that was the baby boomer generation. But at that time, costs were a lot lower. The value of a dollar was higher at that time. And what ended up happening is that a lot of people who were able, college was, first of all, you can get a well-paying job without getting a college degree at that time. If you went to college was much more affordable at the time as well. Like, you could pay for college with a summer job. Like, I pay for college lifeguarding. Like, what? Right. Paying for college lifeguarding? Are you kidding me? Like, that could never
buy
that's
a cup
not,
of coffee
fantasy.
with that shit now, yeah.
Yeah, it's a fantasy to think that people could pay for their college tuition with a low-paying summer job or
I mean, really... also the GI Bill really enabled a lot of people to go to college in the first place, which basically sparked, the idea that you should go to college, right? So we had this whole wave, this whole generation of boomers that are coming back from the war and then using the GI Bill, to go to college, and then they have kids, and then they tell their kids, like, hey, you have to go to college because that's what I did, right? So they set up this kind of, you're worthless, or not worthless. That's a bad way to put it. More like, you'll get ahead in life like I did if you go to college, but we don't have those same, that same push, we don't have that same extra something,
Yeah, and the expense of a college degree is going up higher and higher because the government does guarantee student loans. So schools jack up the prices, making college just a lot more affordable. I mean, a lot more expensive. And by the time kids graduate from school and they're stuck with $80,000 of debt before they join the labor force, that's awful. Like, right. That I can understand how you would want to make a transactional vote for someone like Bernie Sanders who wants to waive all of that. Right. Do I agree with that? No, but I can definitely empathize.
I do,
that.
But yeah,
I don't. Yeah, like, I don't agree with that, but like I can empathize with you voting for that. Like, right. That makes perfect sense. Like, that is an enormous amount of debt for somebody who is at the bottom of the financial earning pool. And like, when you graduate from college, there's not a six-figure job waiting for you. You have to go from like a job that pays, $30K to $40K to $50K to $60K to, you have to work up the labor ladder for 10 years before you start making like livable money.
Yeah, I graduated in 2011. It took me almost 2 years, a year and a half, I want to say. So like 2012-ish, almost 13 for me to get an actual job. And I think I started at like $27K.
That's lower than I started.
Yeah.
My first job was $32K.
Yeah. But even still, it was just
right
like,
out of college.
Whoa, like, I have to pay for what? I got to pay rent,
yeah.
And I got to pay, insurance, and I got to pay, my transportation. I got to feed myself. I got to clothe myself. And I have these student loans that are crazy. Like, and this was before they had anything like, oh, you could pay a percentage of your income. It was like, nope, dude, you're paying $500 a month minimum.
So I empathize. I have empathy for being burdened with that much debt, and the advantage of a lot of people who are older, especially people who've had really the advantage of owning property.
Right.
Their property value went up.
Right.
Over time, their property value went up.
Right.
From when they first purchased that asset. Let's say they purchased a house for $50,000,
right, or less in many cases, yeah,
or less than $50K in many cases, and now the value of that property is over $1 million,
yeah, exactly.
Which could very well be the case in New York City. Like, you can find
in New York City,
dingiest place in the goddamn world,
yep.
still over $1 million. Mm-hmm. that property value rise. I know it's different from every single country, but I would imagine that, it's the property value has risen more than what it was worth when the asset was eventually purchased. Right. And that wasn't hard work.
And now
that was just
them.
Sitting on property,
Yeah, and now we certainly can't afford them, right? So like the all the costs went up, but the compensation didn't go up. And then again, talking about like these transactional votes, I empathize and frankly agree with, the idea of raising minimum wages, to be a living standard, because wages have stagnated for decades, right? But costs have increased exponentially, right? So, I can totally see this. And this kind of brings me back again to this French Revolution, because, the thing that I just read was, if we look at it in the context of today, we've been decades at war right now, just absolutely throwing money away, right? And, we have over the top spending in the government, often wasteful, right? More than often wasteful. And we have, a huge amount of debt, and just terrible financial policy that's really wrecking, the middle class and the workers, and especially the urban poor. It causes a whole lot of resentment and a whole lot of desperation, right? And this coronavirus really makes things fucking interesting in the respect that, only with a, pandemic are we thinking like, shit, we should probably do something about this. We have to throw $1,200 at every person, twice just to make sure shit doesn't break apart. And this is kind of what happened to Louis XVI, Louis the 16th, So he decided a little late to do something about these issues. And so what he did was he actually called up a meeting of the Estates General, or Les États Généraux. I think I'm pronouncing that correctly, which is basically like an assembly, almost like a Congress, and it represented three bodies. So it was France's clergy, their nobility, and the middle class. And something like this hadn't been done for over 150 years beforehand. And the general idea, in the meantime, each of the estates were gonna basically write up a bitch list of of what they want done, and they were all gonna talk about it in a meeting in Versailles. And so basically what happened was, we had these aristocratic members of the what they call the third estate, so the workers, the middle class, right? And while this is where it gets fully Bernie Sanders. 98% of those people in that third estate, the worker class, were just regular workers, right? 98% of them. But this 2% of these people were like these aristocracy people, and they still had veto power, and they could outvote the rest of the other two bodies, which obviously didn't sit very well with the rest of the middle class. And so, the middle class was trying to draw up some plans to get more representative power by basically abolishing noble veto power. In other words, they wanted popular voting instead of status voting, right? They wanted to get rid of the electoral college, basically, which would be the contemporary example there. And most people were on board with fiscal and judicial reform, but obviously the nobles, the aristocrats, they didn't want to give up those privileges that they had in the old system. So what ended up happening was the tennis court oath. Did you hear about this one?
Yeah.
I call it Occupy Tennis Court. And a bunch of those middle class people, they got together and they were like, all right, we're just gonna stay here until we get what we want, right? And within a week of Occupy Tennis Court, they were able to get most of the religious class people and a bunch of hyper liberal nobles together, and basically the king, he had to absorb them all into a new assembly, and kind of capitulate to them. But this sounds like a really great thing, right? A bunch of working class people get together, grassroots, we're gonna change the government, and we're gonna make it so that we get more representation. That sounds all great. There were some complications. So you might have heard of the Bastille and the Great Fear, right? So basically in Paris, there was just, violence and fear happening the entire time. People were mostly happy that like the royal power was breaking down, but they were also super afraid of a military coup because this was, I guess, kind of common, for the time. And they were right to be afraid of that, but you know, at a certain juncture, a bunch of rioters decided to storm the Bastille fortress to basically take gunpowder and weapons and shit so that they can like revolt. And even to today, a lot of people consider this the start of the French Revolution, and they commemorate it with Bastille Day in France, which is a national holiday. It's like their 4th of July, basically. What you might not know about this is that it started a crazy ass revolution. So peasants were like looting and burning homes of tax collectors and landlords and the elite. And this to the elite was known as the Great Fear because they were afraid that well, we're next. So it broke up the status quo. Nobles were basically running away. They were fleeing the country, and ultimately the National Constituent Assembly was formed and abolished feudalism, and that was in 1789. So this was called by some historian whose name I'm forgetting the death certificate of the old order. Keep in mind, this was done by revolution of bloodshed, right? They took these rights not by arguing on a debate stage, but by like killing people. But they were able to do some stuff that we
I disagree with you, but I defend your right to say what. What's the Voltaire quote? I don't even think it's Voltaire.
What was it? Oh shit!
It's I disagree. I disagree. I'm paraphrasing it. It's such a famous quote. It's like, I disagree with you, but I'll defend with my life your right to say it.
Right. Yeah. So that speaking of rights, that's this is when they're actually declaring rights of men and the citizen in France here. And what this sought out to do, and this was August 4th. Don't remember the year. I think it was 1789. Yeah, 1789. And they declared the rights of man and the citizen. I'm not going to try to pronounce it in French. Fuck that. And it was basically grounded in, Enlightenment ideas from like Jean-Jacques Rousseau, right? And what it did was it replaced the ancient regime with a system based on like equal opportunity, freedom of speech, popular sovereignty, representative government, shit that we take for granted today. But it wasn't a walk in the park. They still had to sort out a bunch of shit. Like how are we going to elect delegates, right? Because they were on a delegate system at the time. What do we do about the church, which, if you remember, still played a huge part in Europe. We talked about the 30 Years' War not too long ago. This is after the 30 Years' War by like 100 years, but still same idea. Like the church was still a big part of society and the feudal systems. So they had to figure out what to do with that. And most importantly, they had to figure out like what are they going to do about the king. They actually still had a king at the time. They were a constitutional monarchy, and basically they just landed on a pretty moderate constitution. That was 1791. So the king had royal veto power, and he was able to appoint ministers. So I guess it was kind of like Britain. I don't know. Don't really understand that system of government really, but it didn't last very long anyway. This is when dudes like Robespierre comes in. And they basically began like drumming up popular support for more quote republican forms of government, and for the trial of Louis XVI. So this is where it turns pretty fucking radical. They elected this legislative assembly, and pretty much immediately they went to war with Austria and Prussia, like right away, because they had this idea that all of the nobles that fled during the Great Fear and the storming of Bastille, they were like congregating in Prussia and in Austria, and they thought that they were setting up like a counter revolution to like take back France. So they decided to like preemptively strike there. So they immediately started war. And like domestically, like inside France, a bunch of like insurgents led by extremists, Jacobins, they're called. They attacked the royal residence in Paris. They arrested the king, and that was 1792. This sparked a bloodbath. Fucking like murders killings in the streets, basically people pointing fingers at each other saying, oh, you're a counterinsurgent, whatever. Like, think of the worst possible situations. Like, what's a good way of likening this modernly? Henry, help me out here.
It's like North Korea.
Yeah.
Just taking out anyone who's like, oh, you didn't cry enough for
right.
For Kim Jong-il's funeral. Like,
yeah. That's probably a good example. Yeah. So there was a lot of that going. It was like super McCarthy.
Or you compare it with like the Bolsheviks as well.
Yeah.
Them just like throwing people into Siberia for like nothing. You can really compare it to any.
Or like the Mao.
Just think
the
about
Mao times, Mao Zedong.
Yeah, there's so many extremist movements that have happened. Like, Mao is another really good example.
Yeah, like Cultural Revolution in China. Yeah. So it was fucking bad. A lot of fucking people died. And basically, like, the Legislative Assembly was replaced by a national convention, and they completely abolished the monarchy and established the French Republic. A year later, they scooped up King Louis XVI and basically they condemned him to death for treason. They cut his head off. They put him in a guillotine.
They made a movie about that.
Yep. They killed his wife, Marie Antoinette. Let them eat cake, as she famously said. I think that was taken out of context.
Who played her? Who played her?
I don't remember. Meryl Streep?
No, not Meryl Streep. It was the girl who... Wait, it's going to drive me crazy if I don't remember her name. Peter Parker's girlfriend in Spider-Man. What's her name again?
Which one? Which Spider-Man?
Tobey Maguire.
Oh, fuck. Kate Winslet? No.
No, that's Titanic.
Yeah. I don't know. Google it, and I'll continue when it comes up.
Google it.
So, yeah, they killed both of them, the king and his wife. And right after they killed King Louis XVI, they were still in war with a bunch of European powers. There was a bunch of like internal divisions within the National Convention. Just terrible time. So in 1793, the Jacobins,
Kirsten Dunst.
Thank you, Kirsten Dunst.
Kirsten Dunst.
Okay. Where was I? Fucking Jacobins. Oh yeah, the Jacobins, they took control of the National Convention. And they established, they did some weird shit. They established a new calendar. They eradicated Christianity, among many other things. So they went full atheist, which is interesting. But they also unleashed the Reign of Terror, right? So this is a 10-month period where those suspected enemies of the revolution they got their heads cut off. By the thousands. So over 17,000 people were officially tried and executed during the Reign of Terror by Robespierre, and ultimately even he got his head cut off, which is fucking hilarious. Just karma's a bitch, I guess.
The left eats their own.
Yeah,
burn.
Hilarious.
Libtard.
And okay, so now we're kind of coming to the close of the French Revolution, and I want to wrap this up by just kind of tying it back to what we were talking about in terms of like martial law. At the time, when Napoleon was starting to rise, what was happening was the military was basically totally in charge at this point, of the country, because it was just fucking pandemonium, right? Their system of government was breaking down to such a point where, the entire military had to maintain the authority, and a lot of the power basically went to the generals in the field, and ultimately, what this opened up, was a very successful young general named Napoleon Bonaparte, who was taller than a lot of people think, to take power. Right, so this could be O'Shag Hennessy, if you've already forgotten who O'Shag Hennessy is, that's the commander, Northcom commander who we were talking about earlier. And so I'm not going to go too deeply into Napoleon. Like, we could probably do a whole fucking episode on Napoleon. He wasn't great, right? Do I think that the United States is going to devolve into a reign of terror and ultimately pop up a, dictatorial military leader? No. But it is fun to think about because
At least in the next 20 years.
yeah, I don't know. Who knows? Who knows at this point? But it is fun to think about though because a lot of the preconditions for these things are eerily similar to the preconditions that we're seeing now. You know.
There's a lot of I understand there's a lot of like similar preconditions, but I mean, come on, man. The U.S. is not starving. Like our population is not starving.
Not yet.
Our population never will starve because our surplus of food is so high. Like,
I mean,
we produce the most food in the entire universe. Like, the amount of food that we produce from our breadbasket states. Like,
yeah, under normal circumstances,
Oklahoma,
for sure.
like under normal circumstances. But we're always the U.S.
We're sheltering in place right now, though,
produce,
dude. That's the thing. You know,
we're sheltering in place, but we have so much food that we can. It costs more money to export it out and send it over as aid. I don't think that there's going to be a risk of like legitimate hunger ever in this country.
I don't
now,
know. In that article,
for a living, I think it will be more so of like. I think that most Americans will always have access to some sort of shelter and subsistence because of our ability to produce of mass agriculture and to produce as much food as to assist like the living conditions. What I think a revolution would be sparked of would be more of like that. More of a divide between classes. So if there was a really large, like think about the Native American, like the most disenfranchised group in the United States, if you were going to pick one, and I hate using identity politics because I think it's like toxic at the end, but if there was one disenfranchised group that you could really point out, it's the Native American population.
I was just going to say the same thing. Yeah.
The Native American population.
Yeah.
There is no group that suffers from as many like modern disadvantages and like ailments like drug abuse, poverty, alcoholism. It's really, really, really sad like how bad it is. Mostly Native Americans on the West Coast, more so on the East Coast. It's not all Native Americans. It's the Native Americans that are living in reservation systems that are more so victims of like intense poverty in the U.S. They can still eat, and they're very, very poor. Like their property value, we're talking about like they're the poorest parts of our country mm-hmm. are these Native American reservations.
Right.
I don't think that they're ever. I think it's more going to be like a large class divide. Like if there is just not a middle class anymore, and there's the United States is probably if there's a large minority of people who are underneath like a poverty line that and they compare it to people who are like in the middle class, that's when there would be some type of political strife. I've completely worded that incorrectly. What I mean to say, when there's like a really big class discrepancy, like when there's a lot of poor people, but I don't think those people are going to be starving. And starving typically ignites a little bit more revolution than not starving. Like all the really, really violent revolutions that have taken place, there's been food shortages, and
well, here's the thing, and
there's been the inability to feed itself, like the Bolsheviks, the French.
This is directly from that article, though, and I can just read right off of it. So. It says, local authorities around America are already expressing worries that they have insufficient equipment, particularly ventilators, to deal with a possible influx of coronavirus patients. The number of hospital beds fewer than the number of potential patients that could need them. And brawls have already broken out in stores where products are in short supply. The worst case is that shortages and violence spreads, and the federal military, isolated and kept healthy behind its own barricade, is called to take over. So there is a worry. Not that we can't produce it, it's just that there isn't logistics to deal with this. So a lot of these plans that we've had in place in the past have always been like for an isolated event, whether it's like a 9/11 situation where New York City gets attacked and we gotta go help out, right? So outside states, outside military comes into New York and does its thing. Or like a natural disaster like Hurricane Katrina, or many of the hurricanes that have happened just this past year, where it's these isolated events where we can all as a country pitch in to try and fix shit. But it's not isolated anymore. The coronavirus is everywhere, and whole states are locking down and telling people not to go to work anymore. So it's not that we necessarily couldn't, under ideal circumstances, produce enough food. We certainly could. The problem is an infrastructure problem that breaks down when we have to uniformly stop people from working, right? And this is a very real issue that he's bringing up, because it's not, he says this in the podcast too. It's like, it's not that it's like an isolated event. It's that it's everywhere. And there is no coming from outside to help the inside, because it's everywhere. There is no outside, right? So, yeah, I mean, that's just kind of the point that I'm making, is that, these plans that they are making, and the worries that people have, the reasonable worries about, the military taking over and Oshag Hennessy becoming your new commander in chief, is founded because, they already have the plans to do this. It's just the scale at which we're talking that this could be a potential for is just so much higher, right? And it could, the issues that we're seeing right now, specifically around shortages, specifically around medical supplies, but also around just regular supplies, can cause some serious issues, which could lead to military takeover that there are plans for, right? And I think this is what, Arkin's saying in that article. It's just to be vigilant about this, and again, do I think it's going to devolve this far? No. Like, I'm mostly positive about this. I think we'll pull through. It's going to suck for a couple weeks, but, we'll get through it. But these are things to think about, because, once we start seeing those shortages and once there's violence breaking out, it could devolve into a kind of reign of terror style thing. I don't think it'll get that far, but, history teaches us things, and we should study history so that we can learn how to not repeat them.
All right. So to add to what, or even maybe this is a rebuttal to it. So I do agree that. So Eric, here's the point I'm trying to make right now. So the aftermath of Corona. So let's just say if Corona lasts for, what are the large estimates, like the longer estimates of how long this is going to take place, like where people are social distancing themselves.
Yeah, I mean,
worst case scenario
I think
is
the
like
scarier worst case scenario is like the end of the summer we can stop, but then it'll come back up again in the fall.
Well, I think that the economic consequences in the long term are a lot more scary than the short term consequences that we're going to face over the next couple of months. Because
100%, yeah.
I mean, the federal government already is going to bail. There's going to be a massive bailout. Like, I think the long term is what you really have to worry about. If the U.S. goes $2 trillion in debt, which they very well could go.
We're going to go $2 trillion in debt. I think that's all but secured.
Okay, so when we go $2 trillion into debt, the other big fear is that if all these businesses fail at this time, the government is guaranteeing SBA loans. So, I mean, about $250 billion in guaranteed SBA, like guaranteed small business loans to keep them afloat. Now, it's going to be hard to give. First of all, it's going to be difficult for the banks to identify which businesses have had loss of revenue due to just their general loss of market and due to the impact of coronavirus. So it's going to be hard for banks to even like underwrite those types of loans. But the long-term consequences is that I'm scared about a really high unemployment rate, because usually a high unemployment rate, if that number increases, there's like a very, very strict, there's a very correlating factor that relates to suicide rates. Like the rate, if unemployment grows, suicide usually grows. So I'm concerned about those kinds of consequences.
Well, I mean, if you're talking about unemployment, pretty much like a giant chunk of the United States is unemployed right now. And if I don't know if you read this, but President Trump asked, I forget what it's the IRS or somebody, the folks that put together the unemployment numbers. I forget which division this is, but he asked them to stall those numbers. Like, don't put out those numbers right now because they're going to be fucking bad, because the numbers of people who have applied for unemployment insurance right now has increased tenfold in like the last 2 weeks. So you're worried about unemployment? That shit is happening now, like right now, which is why I'm so cool with going $2 trillion in debt just to bail people out, because honestly, I'd take this $2 trillion over the tens of trillions that we spend on random foreign wars any day. If we're gonna spend the money, we might as well spend it on us.
Danny, I completely agree that I rather spend the money on Americans than spending money
100%.
on pointless wars in the Middle East, on these pointless endeavors in the Middle East that cost us trillions. Like, I don't know if you saw, I was going to send this article to you, but there was a big contract with Lockheed Martin for THAAD missile systems that was just signed.
Disgusting.
But so I completely agree with you on that. But bailouts are never good. Like, bailouts are a consequence for your future self. You have to pay that money back. That money does not, like, there's no secret, like, safe that we have this money. This money is your labor in the future. This money there's not like this secret like savings that the United States has that's like, oh, well, all right, we're just gonna dig deeper into our pockets and like, all right, fine, you got it, here you go. Like, this is money that we don't have. Like, it's your labor. Like, our currency is valued based off our labor, based off, like, the technology and that comes, the technology and the labor and the services that come out of the United States.
Right.
It's not based off some like secret safe that we have.
No, I hear that. We just can't. So we don't even have a choice right now. We don't have a choice right now because we're basically saying everyone's on a mandatory vacation for now.
No, I agree, because the federal government is not, or not just it's not the federal government. It's the local governments who are shutting things down, right? And state and local governments are almost in competition with each other of who can shut down things more. And I honestly am conflicted about this on how I feel about containing coronavirus and containing COVID-19, because if you spoke to me a month ago or 2 months ago, if you listened to our podcast about it, I dismissed it completely. Like, I didn't think it was going to be anything. I was wrong. We're here right now. I'm doing a puzzle, so I'm wrong. I was wrong about that, but this doesn't end well. Like, a bailout is always just, it's the federal government just saying, okay, like, we're going to tax, give supplement more taxes, and to try to, I guess, placate the average American, which is not their fault that they're out of work. Like, it's not like their business failed because they were a lousy business owner, or they were fired because they were a lousy employee. Like, they legitimately,
it's because
through
Cuomo
the threat
made
of force,
the correct call.
We're not allowed to go to work.
Exactly.
Well,
you're not allowed to go to work. Though. That was the correct call, because people are just going to die, and our health system is going to implode if we don't do something about it.
And I'm conflicted. I'm conflicted about what art is the cure worse than the actual virus? Is the cure?
Yeah, 100%.
I am not a medical. I am not a medical. I have no medical background or training, or even really lightly studied like anything in infectious diseases. Like, my infectious disease knowledge comes from movies and entertainment and pop culture. So I have zero authority or zero clue what I'm talking about when it comes to this. But I do. I still, like, Donald. You have to understand that Donald Trump has a pretty difficult job. Even Fauci even said this out loud. Fauci, like Joni.
I like Fauci. Fauci can stay. Fauci's cool.
Fauci even said this. He's like, "Hey, listen, I'm going to give my advice based off my profession. I'm always going to take the most extreme precautions. But when Trump is making a decision, he has to weigh in everything.
Right.
He has awesome responsibility, as in, like, he needs to weigh out the positive and the negatives when it comes to taking extreme measures to limit the spread. It's a tough call." It's a very tough call. So I don't have the answers. Maybe somebody listening has the answers to what should happen. In my gut, I don't think that there should be shutdowns of local businesses, and I don't think it's the positive thing to do. I think there should be widespread precautions that need to take place, and if you're at a certain age, or if you have conditions that would make you more vulnerable to corona or more vulnerable to dying from corona, then you should be taking extra precautions. But
no, man. I mean, I don't think you
shutting down.
I don't think you listen to Cuomo, man. We're getting numbers now that even young people are getting this and dying. You know, it was still like a lot of misinformation's going out there, and we still don't know enough about it.
There's so much information. I don't know what to believe. I don't know what to believe. Like someone.
Well, that's kind of the point. It's like, you might as well be cautious. You know,
my girlfriend the other day was like, you know, because we've been arguing, kind of debating back and forth of it, because you know we've been self-quarantining together, so we've been talking a lot, and she's a lot more she's a Democrat, you know, like she's a Democrat, and you know I'm not a Democrat, so she's typically in favor for measures like this, and I'm, you know, the other day she was like, you know, do you know that corona is 30 times more deadly than the flu? And I was like, no, it's not. There's no way that it's 30 times more. It is. They can't even measure it. You cannot measure that corona is 30 times more deadly.
It's called a crude mortality rate, man. They take how many people were infected and how many people died.
I want to see the
how many people were infected, how many people were died.
But the thing is, though, is that so many people,
you're less likely to die than if you get the coronavirus. Point
blank. 30 times.
I don't know about 30 times, but I can tell you
that is such a crazy estimate.
Like, I don't know what number she was looking at, but I can tell you when I've done this research on it, like without a doubt, like it's just math. Like there's no subjectivity to it. More people die if they're infected. You have a higher likelihood of dying if you're infected with coronavirus than of the common flu. But the common flu kills a lot more people because it's just been around longer and it's more prevalent.
I have zero doubt that corona has a higher mortality rate, but I don't think it's 30 times more than the flu.
Yeah, I mean, I won't argue against you on that one. I don't know. I
highly doubt. I really believe that number comes from like taking the if you take the mortality rate, like something like this. I don't know exactly how that number came to be, but if you take the mortality rate in Italy, and like Italy is basically like the Florida of Europe. You know, like old people go there to vacation to retire, you know? So of course that people are going to die more when there's a really high population of elderly people. Like diseases wipe out the elderly. Like it's terrible and it's sad, and like
right, but you just gotta be careful about like how you think about it, because it's is it going to disproportionately affect the elderly? Sure, but you're not safe because you're not elderly. You can still die. Like you will still die. So,
but you can still die of the flu. Like
of course,
one of my
yes, of course. But the point though is that this is happening so suddenly and rapidly, and people are dying at such a high clip with this one disease, this one novel strain of coronavirus, that it's literally causing a healthcare like nightmare. It's a crisis, dude. And I'm talking about like, all right, let's just say every old person's going to die, right? Which means that every old person's going to be funneled through the hospital system, which means we literally just don't have enough hospital beds. So what happens if you are, you know, you get into a car accident, God forbid tomorrow, you know, and you need to be rushed to the hospital. Well, fuck, the entire hospital is dealing with all of this coronavirus right now. You're probably going to die. They're not going to be able to save you if there's no capacity to save you. And if even just a good percentage of the medical healthcare professionals that are busting their ass right now trying to keep people alive for this virus, old, young, and everything in between, right? If even a small percentage of these people start getting sick and can't come to work, or God forbid die, there's nobody to help you if you have some completely unrelated emergency. This is why taking these precautions makes sense. Like, we need to stop thinking about it like,
these aren't
I'm
these aren't
31,
precautions.
I'm healthy, I'm not gonna get the virus, I'm not gonna die. That's like the wrong way to look at this.
Dude, a precaution is washing your hands and masking up and wearing gloves. Like, taking precautions is not taking public transportation. But shutting down commerce is more than just a precaution.
How about this?
It is a damn
So you
injunction.
said,
Like, it's
I hear you, man. I hear you. I can't. I agree with you in many capacities.
like there's
but
so,
I just,
like, do you know how much
I just
people
disagree
are
that we have to do this. The thing is, you said in the beginning you went for a walk with your girlfriend, right? And it was sad because you were looking around. There was a bunch of fucking businesses that are closed and stuff like that. And there's like not a whole lot of people on the streets. The traffic is almost non-existent now here in New York City. I see this shit myself too. Do you really think that if we didn't force businesses to close, do you really think that people would be taking these precautions en masse? They wouldn't. They'd still be taking their mass transit.
No, they wouldn't.
They would still be taking their mass transit. That nobody would be washing their fucking hands. Nobody would be self-quarantining. Everybody would be going to their stores, their bars, and shit. Like the day before they announced that mandatory, shutdown of businesses, there was hella people at the bar across the street from my house right now. Reckless abandon, right? So, yeah, does it suck? Fuck yes. And is this going to give us a huge hit to our economy? Abso-fucking-lutely. Is $2 trillion worth of debt taking on sound fucking scary for the future? Yeah, but we have to do it. There's no, to my knowledge, there's been nothing proposed that addresses the health crisis and the economic crisis. All I'm hearing are two different sides. One that says, hey, we need to address the health crisis, and we're going to take a financial hit. Or B, we're going to side with the financial, and we're just going to take the health hit. I have not yet heard a good plan to help save both at the same time. And if I'm going to choose one, it's the health one.
All right, so here's where I'll barter with you. So here's I'm concerned about like balancing the budget, which will never happen, but that is my concern.
Yeah, it's the funniest thing you've said all episode.
Yeah, balancing the budget, right? what planet do you live on? But like, if I wanted to promote fiscal responsibility, then I'm looking to cut unnecessary expenditures that I think that people could agree with. So
okay.
I want to look at unnecessary expenditures. So, we gave $1 trillion to Lockheed Martin, or we made cut it. Cut these $1 billion foreign escapades. I would cut those.
$50 billion for the cruise industry. Cut it.
For the cruise industry, I would see. Here's where I relate to progressives. I completely understand your hatred for like business favoritism and stuff like that. Like, I am 100% with, like, I'm with Bernie Sanders when he says stuff like, we have to stop favoritizing, these corporations. Like, I agree with him on that. That's a correct diagnosis. I disagree with, like, basically everything else in his economic policy, but
yeah.
but like wiping out, like, I don't agree with, like, free healthcare and free college and stuff like that. But I agree with, like, big business favoritism and, like, these ridiculous, like, these ridiculous corporate welfare contracts to companies like Lockheed Martin and Boeing and
right.
And Boeing is going to be getting money from this because they're failing because they make planes that fall out of the fucking sky.
I mean, to their defense, Boeing is the largest exporter in the United States. Period. So I could see why people think they're too big to fail, and want to bail them out. But, like, fuck, what happened to free market capitalism? Where, like, if you don't do good enough and you didn't save,
there's no such thing as free market capitalism in this country.
No.
There's no such thing as free, and it's like people conflate, like, libertarianism as, like, just pro-business rhetoric. Like, you're pro-business no matter what. Like, it's not, like, that's not libertarianism. Libertarianism is accepting both consequences. The consequence of, like, succeeding in a free market and failing in a free market. And if you fail in a free market,
somebody else
you
steps
deserve
in.
to fail, and someone else deserves to step in. And you shouldn't be bailed out for speculating, for gambling on Wall Street.
Right.
What really pisses me off? How many fucking politicians were insider trading?
Oh God, yeah, that really pisses me off.
How many fucking politicians were insider? Once they got the brief down of Corona, they said, "All right, dumping my stocks."
And then they tell all their rich friends and donors, like, "Hey, dump the stocks."
Motherfucker.
Fuck those guys. Fuck those guys.
You can shoot them to the fucking sun, as far as I care. Like that stuff, you can shoot them to the sun.
Yeah, fuck
like
those guys.
that is fucked up. But like, it's. I'm concerned about like Joey B, who just opened up Joey B's Crab Shack, or Taj, who just opened up his Indian restaurant,
right?
Or whoever who's like
in 2008 we decided to spend $750 billion on bailing out the banks.
Or the Flair, who just opened up her gender neutral clothing store.
Yeah. Yeah, I hear that, but like,
I don't want her to fail. I want her business to do really well, or
at least you have a fighting chance.
Him or her, they, Z.
Yeah,
what's
Z.
the genderless pronoun?
Z, I think is good.
Z. But how would you refer to his or her?
Their.
I want their business to succeed. Their gender fluid business to succeed and not be shut down. It's sad seeing that little Soho shops closed down and no one in it. That's what I'm concerned about. Like the people who are not Amazon, who's going to ultimately not be hurt at all because everyone's going to Amazon for all their needs.
Fuck yeah, they are.
That's what I'm concerned.
Right now,
yeah, but like everyone, that's my like. I don't want I'm concerned about the little guy who's not a major corporation,
right?
Can be shut down. Like I'm watching New York One all day, and it's like, all these people who own fitness studios, like they're scrambling around, like, how the fuck do I pay my bills? Like, all right, I guess I have to do online classes, and there's no way these online classes that they do for their clients are going to profit them as much money as their full service gym or Pilates studio or yoga studio. Like I saw this woman on New York One who owns this who owns like a Pilates workshop, and she can't see her clients, and she, personal training instructors, they charge probably like $35 to $40 an hour, when they meet with clients. Like that's all gone. Like she had to do $7 free like workouts from her Instagram account. Well, I'm like, or not our Instagram. I think she was using Zoom. Everyone is using Zoom. Like if you Zoom is profiting.
Zoom is now a household name. Yeah.
Zoom. No one knew what the fuck Zoom was when we were starting this podcast, because that was the first podcasting software.
Like
we were like, what the fuck
maybe.
is Zoom?
Yeah.
But now Zoom is like the new like business that's new Walmart. The new Walmart is Zoom. They're so like it's crazy how they.
Hey, but I mean, free market capitalism, right? Some shit went
free
down
market.
in the market.
They solved the problem. They solved the problem.
Yeah.
There was a problem. They solved that problem.
And maybe there is a Pilates instructor out there who's gonna just like capitalize on this, and she or he or they, whatever, figure out a way to monetize online Pilates, in a way that makes sense, that makes them a ton of money, and that's just the way that we go. I guess here's the thing: is like, if you're worried about these small businesses, which frankly, so am I, then we should be welcoming this like trillions of dollars of debt that we're about to take on for this, because we're not talking about like what we did in 2008, where we're just like, here's $750 billion towards the banks because they gambled and fucked up, and we can't let them implode. Here is $1,200 in your pocket. Fucking Andrew Yang was right. He just got the wrong. The wrong issue. You should have been talking about pandemics.
I'm worried about turning these small businesses into government dependence.
Yeah, I mean, but
like, that's my ultimate worry. Like, I don't want
a temporary measure.
Entrepreneurs, they embark on entrepreneurial measures to gain freedom and not to become government dependent.
Right.
And,
well, I mean,
we're not going to be
dependent on the government because we don't have to give it back. It's free. It's a grant, right? So, what we're talking about is hopefully a temporary measure that maybe we can parlay into a scalable, UBI, like a universal basic income, by reprioritizing how it is that we spend our money. You know, maybe we can start talking about cutting those things like Boeing and Raytheon and shit like that. Maybe we can start talking about, you know, dialing back on some like really not profitable social welfare programs that just aren't working, right? Maybe we can talk. Maybe we can finally have that open conversation, because at this point, I think, you know, this is pretty bipartisan. Pretty much everybody's like, yes, please pay us, right? Everybody understands.
Of course,
everybody understands why we have to do this now. So,
but of course, like if I'm not allowed to go to work,
right.
if I can't go to my, you know, wherever, if I have a accounting firm and I can't meet with my clients, or all of my businesses that I normally work with are shut down, because it's not just one industry that's shut
like
down. It's all the supply industries. Like
right.
industries do not operate in isolation with each other. Like if I'm an accounting firm and I work primarily with small business owners in my town, then my business suffers too.
Right.
If all of my clients do not have any money, like they don't, like I don't get paid either.
Right.
You know, if I am a lawyer and I work in a town and my clients are small businesses, then I don't make money. If they're manufacturers, if they're restaurant owners, if they're in, you know, the hospitality space, if they're retailers, if they're, you know, whatever
they are, you're not.
If they're healthcare provider, you know, your industry suffers too. All these industries work with each other. There's not like, you know, oh, it's only this industry that's affected. Like there's buying and selling industries that are always affected as well.
Right.
And it's
what I'm really liking is this Defense Production Act, you know, and how like a lot of these you're hearing about these alcohol makers, like these whiskey distillers and shit, that are now transitioning to make hand sanitizer. Like I think that's fucking cool, you know, or like how a bunch of these like tech billionaires like Elon Musk.
This is what we did in World War II.
Elon Musk delivered like, I don't know, something like 90,000 ventilators that he bought from China to LA or some shit like that, right? I think this is really super cool. Like a bunch of people like actually pitching in and like doing what they can, and doing what they can for the people who can't. You know what I mean? And especially like, dude, all the praise, all the glory, all the high fives to the healthcare workers, you know, who are seriously busting their asses right now. I think this is like, you know, this really sucks and it's a crisis and shit like that. But at the end of the day, what I see is like a vibrantly positive American spirit, you know, because, you know, people are doing shit right now, you know, to not for themselves anymore, but for the greater good. And a lot of people are really stepping up, and I think it's awesome.
And that's a positive note I think we can end on.
Yeah.
Right?
Totally.
All right. Well, thank you guys for listening to another episode of Bro History. Do we have any announcements that we have to make? Rate and review the podcast. It's helpful. I really appreciate the reviews and the ratings that came in over the past week. It was really nice, and it helps us grow the show, and it's nice to hear from you. And then I'm slowly adding the audio on YouTube. So if you guys want to like look at our faces, if you don't know what we look like, you can go to our YouTube channel. That will be in the link as well. And we have a Patreon as well. If you want to support us, we release some extra content on there, extended podcast. So that is there as well. And we have our Twitter handles in there. So you want to follow us, Henry and Danny. We're not anonymous. We're real people talking. We're real internet people.
Right.
And hit us up. We love hearing from you guys. I love it when you guys hit me up on Twitter or email us. You can email us at info@brohistory. It's still a real email. We had a Q&A there, but we should start doing that again.
Yeah, right. Well, everybody's
info
like
at brohistory. Yeah, info at brohistory. And then eventually when I add the rest of these, it takes me like, my internet's super slow. I'm using like my home internet, so it takes me like an hour to upload one of these podcasts to YouTube. When I catch up, we'll start figuring out how to. I have zero clue how to use YouTube.
Maybe we'll start doing the Zoom.
Maybe we'll start doing the good old Zoom. But yeah, I suck at using YouTube. So anyone who knows about YouTube or knows YouTube well, hit me up, because I need as much advice as possible. All right. Peace.